We're going to be discussing what is the best aftermarket solution for the coolant tank on your F90 M5. If you've been following me for a while or you're part of the F90 M5 community, you're probably going to be aware that these coolant tanks are not the best, and they can result in things like this, which are injectors that are covered in coolant and fail. And that is because this is two pieces of plastic that are bonded together and it tends to fail and leak. Currently on the market, there is 4 solutions available to get rid of this problem. I have 3 of them in front of me, but there is a 4th. But the 4th one requires you to have a different set of intakes, like a silicone smaller one. I don't have that on my car. Most of my customers don't have that. So for that reason, we're not going to be including this. And the ones that I've got in front of me all work when the rest of the components on the car are OEM or uprated. What's the 3 solutions that are currently available and in front of me right now? Well, firstly, we have RK Auto Works out in America that have made this billet piece. This is a 2-piece that uses the OEM sensor and the OEM cap. Secondly, we have RS Grigo, which are a UK brand, and they have brought out a 1-piece solution that uses their own sensor and a Mishimoto cap. And thirdly, I believe this company is Russian, their name is Level Performance, and they have came out with a surround that still uses the OEM tank, and in a case that you have a failure, it redirects the coolant away from the block so that you don't end up with messy injectors and coils. So here we have these 3 solutions. Which one's best? Well, unfortunately, that's something you're going to have to decide yourself. I'm in a completely unbiased point of view with all 3 products. I think they all have pros, they all have cons, so I'm going to go through all of those with you guys, and then hopefully you can make the decision on which one you think fits your needs best. Let's talk about pricing. So the surround comes in at £530. The UK tank comes in at
£1,080.
and then the third tank, the American one, comes in at £1,100 plus customs. Let's talk about the weight of these 3 products now. I don't consider this a selling point for any of them because the vehicles weigh so much, and of course we all weigh quite a bit, but more out of interest, what do these 3 weigh? Well, the first one, which is the lightest one, weighs in at 1.6 kilograms. This solution weighs in at 2.3 kilograms. And then finally, the RK solution weighs in at 4.1 kilograms. So there is quite a bit of difference between the 3 products, but in real world, it's going to make no difference whatsoever. Let's talk about ease of installation. Which one's the hardest, which one's the easiest? Well, firstly, you only want to have a professional fit any 3 of these tanks. Don't do it yourself if you're not familiar with tools, because you're probably going to take your engine for a bath in coolant. But for ease of installation, this one has to win because it needs no real modifications. All you're doing is unplugging the coolant lines, fitting the surround, plugging it back in. So apart from making sure you don't make a mess when you're unplugging these, it's not too difficult to do. When it comes to these 2, I would say that this one is easier to install, and it does have one thing that you could consider technical, and that is that you need to cut into the wiring loom for the original sensor, and then you can need to connect a new plug onto this. And of course, that's more involved than it's going to be for that one. And then thirdly, on this solution, you are going to need to pull out the OEM thermostat out of this. So this tank will need sacrifice, and if you want to fit this, that sensor needs to be removed. And then we have some O-rings here where it plugs back in and then locks into place. So neither of these 3 are complicated to install. They're all quite simple, but if we was to argue which is easiest and which is hardest, I'll probably say this one is easiest and this one is hardest. But if you're competent enough to fit that tank, you're competent enough to fit this tank also. Let's talk about the pros and cons of each product. So one of the things that I like about the surround is if you actually overpressurize the system, you're still going to divert the coolant away for the engine. Where with the other solutions, they're eliminating the problem of the tank splitting. In the case where they overpressurize, that coolant still doesn't have a diverted channel to run down. The argument is, if you are overpressurizing, you have a lot more to worry about than getting some coolant on your injectors or coils, because you potentially got a lot of engine damage. But I still like this fact, and I like the way that it does direct it in any circumstance. Now, also, for you guys that are conscious of weight and you really are trying to keep the weight of the vehicle down, this is the lightest option available. This is the one that's going to keep the car the lightest on the scales. It's also the cheapest option. It's also the easiest to install. And if you're not trying to put a load of bling underneath the engine bay, you're going to find that this one is the closest to the OEM look because the OEM tank is still there. So that's the positives of this tank. If we was to talk about the negatives of it, they're not too many, but you could argue that this is quite a flimsy solution compared to billet tanks, and also it's more of a plaster to the problem. So with this, you still do have potential for the tank to leak, but it's just if it does leak, it's not going to go over the engine. But you could argue it's a plaster to the solution because you still have potential for a leaking tank, whereas if you go over to the other ones, the tank is not going to leak at all. Let's talk about the RS Grigo design. It's nice, clean, simple. It's a one-piece design and it holds 250 ml more fluid than the OEM tank. When it comes to the downside of the RS Grigo tank, despite it being a one-piece solution, the temperature or level sensor, I should say, does screw in here. So although it's one piece, there is a gasket there and that could potentially fail. The other thing that could be a downside for this is the way that the connector goes on. So you don't use the OEM connector, it comes with its own connector that you put into the wiring. And also we do need to put a little bit of sealant on this to hold the connector on firmly. Let's talk about the RK tank. So this is the most bling one out of the three solutions. If you look at the machining work on it, it's really, really tricky. As coolant tanks can go, it's very pretty, and there's some small details on it as well, like they've got their brand in here, but there's like a little arrow that's been engraved into this housing so that you can see exactly where the OEM cap should be fitting. Another benefit of this tank is it is still using the OEM cap and it is still using the OEM sensor. So if you want as many OEM components as possible, this is going to achieve it for you. And also the design of it is very close to the OEM one as well. So the actual shape of it is like a metal version of the plastic OEM one. Let's talk about the downsides of the RK tank. So first one, it's coming from America, so you are going to have to pay customs on it, and also you're going to have to take into consideration that shipping time. Now, I can say that this thing landed on our doorstep real quick. So despite it coming from America, it only took a couple of days and we had it. Also, no one has managed to find a OEM sensor for sale that directly fits into these. This is why the other tanks using their own sensor, and that is why RK are requiring you to fit the OEM sensor. So a downside to this would be that you need to sacrifice an OEM tank. Now for you guys that have already had one split, you can just pull the sensor out of that. But if you're doing this as a preemptive thing, then you are going to have to cut up the tank that hasn't failed yet. For you guys that are giving the car track use or you're driving fast out on the roads, you may be thinking, this OEM tank's baffled. What about these two? Well, I can tell you that is baffled and that is baffled also. For you guys that are doing track work, that's something you haven't got to worry about on any of the solutions. So there we have it. That's the pros and cons that I can see in all three of these solutions. Now, this has been a problem that's plagued me with my car from the day I bought it. I literally bought my car with a leaking expansion tank. So firstly, I want to say a big thanks to all three of these companies that have came out with a solution to get rid of this problem and help stop our engines getting damaged. And secondly, just want to say to all three of you guys that have made these tanks, I hope the video that I've made is unbiased and all of you that are watching it feel that it is fair for your products. And for you guys that are looking to buy a tank, I hope that it gives you all the unbiased, genuine information that you need to see what design you feel is going to fit for your car best. To learn the best way to install these tanks, have a look over our other video where we show how we install this tank. Now, for you guys that like this content, click like, click subscribe, because we're always talking about F10 and F90 M5s.